Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin.
Jack Hallows, trainer and online coach from Australia. It's good to see you, my friend. I actually just like saying your name. It's got this Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp, meets Sleepy Hollow sort of thing. You've heard this stuff before, I'm sure.
Mate, when I was in high school, in Australia, high school works a little bit different to like the States and Canada and stuff. Like we do, it's just primary into high school. There's no like middle school or anything. But when I was about sort of 14, 15, I had this history teacher who used to assign nicknames to everyone in the class. And I remember day one of about year like 10th grade, so I would have been about 15, 16 years old. He just looks me dead in the eye and he goes, I watched a movie last night that you were in, and I was like, oh, here we go. I was like, it's Pirates of the Caribbean. It's got to be. And he just goes, R, matey. And I was like, oh, here we go. So for the next 3 years, I was referred to as Jack Sparrow. But there are much worse things to be compared to because it's a fantastic movie and character. So I'll take it.
I mean,
I've had Deathly Hallows as well a lot.
Two easy nicknames. I mean, Captain Jack, or you've got like Sleepy Hallows, right? Either work really well.
Yeah.
All right. So that's first reason why I brought you on. The second is you do a wonderful job of communicating evidence-based training information, fitness lifestyle stuff in a resonant, very savvy way. Your social media is great. So I'm thrilled to have you on, and you are part of kind of a rebranded approach that everybody listening, this is going to be one of the earliest in a new and ongoing sequence of episodes. The old stuff was really geared towards coaches and career development. That was really fun for well over 6 years. But life and career just got so busy that I decided with some of the pivots, it was really wise to probably reach out to a greater audience. I'll talk a little bit more of that at the end. But first, okay, this one I've always been fascinated by. Is Australia ahead of the West on fitness? And is the average Australian more concerned with their fitness, health, appearance than the average Westerner?
I was actually having this conversation with a mate yesterday because I'm originally from the UK and so is he. And we were talking about how we think that Australia is definitely a much more fitness centric country than England is, for example. So I went back to the UK last year, and when you're in London or you go to Manchester, some great bodybuilding gyms, some awesome stuff over there. But the general consensus, in my opinion, is that, yeah, I think Australia is more. I don't know whether I'd say it's more fitness focused or just more outdoorsy lifestyle sort of thing. Like, and I think that's possibly like if you take the States, for example, if you look at the States, there's obviously places like California and all these kind of coastal areas that are very much outdoorsy lifestyle. You know, you go hiking, you go out, you get out, you go to Yosemite, you go to the national parks and stuff. And then you've got more like city life and suburb life, where I suppose that's more families and priorities change and all that sort of stuff. So I would say Australia is very similar to the States in that regard, in that we've got coastal areas and hiking areas and all that sort of stuff where everybody's fascinated by it. But then you've got where I grew up in the southwest suburbs of Sydney, where it's very much like just, yeah, two kids, suburbs, just work 9 to 5 and that's your thing sort of thing. Weekends is barbecues and stuff, yes, but you're not necessarily going hiking or going to the beach or all that sort of stuff. It's more just kind of sit around and drink by the pool kind of thing. So yeah, I think it depends, but I think in terms of like the actual fitness industry, Australia, it certainly used to be very much ahead, I think. I don't know whether it is anymore. But when I was certainly coming into the industry, a lot of the people that I was learning from were Australian, whereas now I feel like I've branched out and I get a lot more of my education from people in the States and stuff like that.
And you hit on something really important, and it wasn't even the angle I was taking with this, but your environment where you grow up, where you
Hmm.
live, is very deterministic, and not everybody has the option to be able to move and self-select. You have me thinking about how to. I never spent any time in the Rocky Mountains of Western Canada, but there are some major resorts here. I've got some friends who work there, but you see a large number of Australians go there to work, and these are people who self-select to skiing, outdoorsy type stuff.
Hmm.
And then you got me thinking, you're right, California, places like Colorado, the Denver area, I would
Mm.
say Washington State, and then you get up into British Columbia, areas like Kelowna, Vancouver Island in Canada. The climate is much more mild, so that it's very outdoor centric. And if
Yeah.
you love winter sports, Edmonton, where I am, there's not much outdoorsy stuff to be doing in the wintertime. So that makes sense. And I mean, for those who have the ability to actually like relocate themselves to either within a small geographic radius or a large one to orient your where you live with the lifestyle that aligns with you, if that's within your power, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense. All right, next thing. So love this one because there was some stuff about this recently. Science-based lifters versus old school bodybuilders. Are they
Oh,
really as far apart? You know what I'm talking about. Are they really as far apart as people in each camp often present themselves? And we can go deeper.
absolutely not. Like this is what makes me laugh so much, right? And it's wild. Like, obviously all the stuff that happened with Jeff Nippard recently,
Yeah.
and that whole debacle. But like, this is what people miss is they think that so we obviously have to define what science-based actually means to people. And for some people, science-based is people who sit in a lab and they just read studies and all that sort of stuff all the time, and that's it. And they're basically just taking the stuff that's in studies and saying this is how to train without actually ever applying it to a human being. For me, I like to look at it more as evidence-based, which I think is what most people in this kind of circle that both of us sort of like dip our toe into quite a bit resonate with. And evidence to me is okay, the studies tell us this, and anatomy and biomechanics and sort of logic tell us this, but also human beings are very funny creatures that don't always align with what's in the textbooks and always align what's in a sort of study that is a control group. So therefore, anecdotal evidence also matters too. When you put the two things together, you tend to get a picture that makes more sense. And I think where the divide comes is that people look at it as old school bodybuilder, dumb meathead, and evidence slash science based big smart nerd who don't lift. That's kind of the two camps that everyone puts themselves in. Whereas really, you look at old school bodybuilders, as much as yes, there's the side of it whereby in the golden era, for example, they're pumping as many drugs as possible. So really anything they did was probably going to work to an extent because a lot of them are genetic freaks too.
So you just hit on two big parts of the evidence. So let's actually check a bunch of boxes. Because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
often think sometimes the stuff that gets presented as quote science-based tends to be majoring in the minor. What's
Mm,
evidence-based? Training to near failure. Okay.
yep.
That's evidence-based. Okay. So your training intensity, having a pretty good training intensity. Whether you like it or not, the pharmacology of performance enhancing drugs for the people who are best with that stuff. There is a science there. Okay. So whether or not you want
Yeah,
to like
yeah.
you want to get into the moral argument of natural or not, okay, like just let's acknowledge that there's some hardcore science there. That shit works. All right. Nutrition. There is optimize your protein intake. There
Yeah.
is eating enough calories to grow. There is getting enough sleep, enough recovery. These are all evidence-based things. There is putting mechanical tension on muscle, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. A lot of arguments around that one. And
Yeah.
so and I think both camps are probably doing a really good job. I also think both camps are presented as ideological tribal entities to
Yep.
brand around more than they are true disparities. I think they're presented as sort of each side presents maybe a bit of a straw man fallacy about what the other represents. And it creates this false dichotomy. And then this thing that you said kind of blew up in a very big way in the industry over the two different camps.
Yeah.
So this stuff to me is evidence-based. And then when I see, I mean, hey, I think there's actually a whole bunch of really good single arm cable stuff. But when I see
Mhm.
people fighting over ideology, because it's ideology, it's training ideology, methodology. And you get someone arguing and saying, well, this single arm cable thing is better than let's say a bent over barbell row. You see like
Yep.
pictures of Ronnie Coleman lifting, and you also said like genetics, drugs, all the training intensity, all these other things really done well. And then you get someone who's like, hey, the single arm cable thing, if Ronnie only trained this way, he would have done better. It's like Ronnie Coleman is one of the true greatest bodybuilders of all time.
You're not getting much better. It's not.
And I mean, could there be probably more efficient ways? And you kind of look, in his Ronnie's style of training, the reason why he is in this state, he's physical state he's in right now. But we also have people who train, high load, high intensity, varying volumes, whether it's your Dorian Yates or Jay Cutlers or what have you. And those guys are in, like, from what we can see, remarkable shape right now as they're getting older. So it's not like, the way that Ronnie trained. I mean, fuck, he trained heavy. But
Yeah.
you still have like I was at a conference recently. I saw Ed Cohn, who is a very legendary, strength
Mhm.
athlete, and he's an older man. He walked by and he's at this conference, and dude looks pretty good. So just because someone trained hard and heavy a lot, Louis Simmons, he's a pretty old dude, he could still do a lot of cool shit, right?
Well, I think this is the thing, man, is that you just touched on there. It's like all the principles of both of these things are the same. It's just how you come to apply the principle that essentially changes. And it's like, if you look at the old school bodybuilders, if you look at quote unquote meatheads, for example, as you said, they're still lifting to failure. They're still trying to maximize mechanical tension. They're still doing all these things where they know that, to do a lat pull down with your arm tight to your body is going to give you a different stimulus to doing a lat pull down with your arm further out from your body and bringing it back towards your body. They know these things are different. They maybe don't know the answers why. They maybe don't care about all the details why, but they still apply the same things. And I think this is where the divide comes, is that yes, you get even people like myself, I like to understand the why behind all this sort of stuff. It fascinates me. So sometimes I make content, and even last night I made a post about training back, and I talked about seated cable rows versus barbell rows and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, barbell row, great exercise, but for some people the lower back is going to be a limiter, so maybe a seated cable row is a better option. But it's like, it's always with that caveat of for some. And I think the biggest divide comes because, and we see this with everything in human beings, from religion to politics to even our favorite movies, our favorite, I had this conversation with a friend of mine, Mark Carroll, recently about like our favorite iterations of Batman and stuff. And we've always got to have the arguments, because as human beings, we like that debate, we like that argument. But generally, there's always this big gray area that needs to be encompassed and nuance. But really, most people online know that that doesn't get likes, it doesn't get clicks, it doesn't get views. So they just want this black and white statement of one side says barbell row is better, one side says seated cable row is better. Both sides probably do both exercises and probably prescribe both exercises at different times, but they just know that nobody cares about all the middle area, unfortunately, in the sort of wider population. So I think that's where a lot of the divide comes as well. But yeah, basically, as you said, they're all kind of doing the same thing.
So, from your view, have there been any meaningful changes to how we interpret the quote research, the science on training, with this big push on all this stuff? I mean, I think one of the big ones, and this comes out of kind of Brad Schoenfeld being one of the leads on this one, is the understanding of how the rep range doesn't matter as long as we're getting to failure. I think that's fundamentally I think in terms of practicality, it probably didn't change a whole lot, but it's a fundamental shift in how we understand training. Are there any other big ones that will meaningfully improve how the person listening to this gets results?
I think volume has been, and not just in terms of like set reps per set, but in terms of total sets per week. I think one of the biggest clapbacks that I've always got working with people who, they want to build muscle and stuff, but they're not sure whether they want to, dedicate time to the gym, is they think they have to spend hours training multiple times per week in order to elicit a really good result. When in reality, this idea of doing 20, 30 sets per workout and doing that 5 times a week, that a lot of people thought this real high volume blast, that isn't practical, and it's not necessary for 99.99% of the population. Again, coming back to bodybuilders, yes, if you're enhanced, you can get away with more training volume because your recovery is going to be better. And generally, you live a lifestyle whereby you're fostering a better recovery environment. But for anyone who's listening to this who just likes to train a couple of times a week, wants to build a bit more muscle, wants to look a bit better naked, at the end of the day, if you do 2, maybe 3 at a push, really hard sets of 4 to 5 exercises in a workout, and you separate them by about 2 to 3 minutes rest. You do a short warm up at the start. If you want to, you can do a little bit of cardio at the end. You've got about a 45 to an hour window of being in the gym, maybe 3 to 4 times per week, which is what, like 3% of your week, 4%, not even, sort of thing, right? And that's all you have to dedicate to your training in order to grow muscle and in order to start seeing changes in your body. And that's what people don't realize. I even had a post recently go viral, which was like, I've been doing these different workout templates on social media, just trying to give people more of an evidence-based approach. And it was a glute workout, which glutes tend to go really well with my audience. It's something that seems to just resonate with them. But it was 4 exercises, 2 sets of each exercise, 6 to 12 reps in a set. Yes, you can have that wide of a rep range, guys. It's okay as long as you're pushing the intensity to failure. As Andrew said, anywhere between 3 and 30 reps is going to do you well. It's just in a practicality sense, 6 to 12 probably makes most sense. We could talk about that a bit, but and the amount of comments underneath were like, 45 minutes is enough. Like, is 45 minutes enough? Is this many sets enough? And it's like, yeah, you guys just need to learn to train harder, which as you said before, Andrew, pushing closer to failure. So guys, if you're doing, let's take a hip thrust for an example, because it's a very up and down exercise. If your first 2 reps are really easy and your last 2 reps are also really easy, and that up or that concentric phase in the movement does not slow down, you guys aren't training hard enough. So you are going to have to do a lot more sets in order to elicit the same stimulus out of your training. Whereas if you do a set of 8 reps at, let's say, just 100 pounds, let's just use that as a flat number, and your first 2 reps feel like they're okay, that's cool, but your last 3 start to remarkably slow down. Maybe that third last rep, you're like, oh, that was a bit more difficult. Second last rep, you're like, oh my God, this is really getting hard to get to lockout. And then that last rep, you're fighting for your life to get to lockout. It's really struggle to get there. You just about get there, and then the weight slams down to the floor. That is a very effective stimulative set, and you only have to do 2 sets like that in a workout for any given exercise in order to maximize the response out of that and accumulate enough, as Andrew said before, the term mechanical tension, which is the main driver that we need to grow. And I think that's another thing that probably has come out of recent research. And again, I don't sit there reading studies all day. Like, I find all this stuff very interesting, but like, I look into what I want to look into and I do my best to understand it. But we now know, you don't need all of these crazy things like muscle damage or long eccentrics or metabolic damage and all that sort of stuff in order to stress and build the muscle. You just need mechanical tension, which comes from those concentric phases, whereby we shorten or squeeze a muscle, slowing down as the set goes on. I think that's the biggest one for me that I think positively benefits people, because they can just focus on quality over quantity and get the same results.
You said something big in there. I want to expand on it. What the reps look like. If all of your reps, and I've heard other people say similar things, if all of your reps are really, really like clean, pristine, like some great looking reps, if the rep at the end, like you said, looks the same as a rep at the beginning, the training's not hard enough. So you have these people who think that, once your form starts to break down, well, it depends on, let's say, you're doing a Romanian deadlift and your form breaks down where we know the evidence that like form and injury risk, or there's not a strong relationship there. But if you are doing a fairly heavy Romanian deadlift and you're not able to maintain your spinal position, your core brace, that's probably a problem. But if you're doing a seated cable row or, chest supported row, and you're not able to like squeeze a lockout as well on maybe the last 2 reps where you're eliciting a ton of tension, guess what? You're at no risk. I'm not worried about that at all. Your training intensity is probably really good. There's something else in here, and I've known. So I think there's 2 concepts. One is, and I love Dr. Mike Israel. I think their stuff on volume is really foundational, and I think it's really, really good. So obviously, the nuance advances. Mike has always sort of talked about minimum effective dose versus maximum recoverable volume, and I think Mike tends to bias towards kind of the maximum recoverable volume. But there is actually, that's what he's said in the past, and I tend to find he tends to shift with the research. But there is an argument to say that, well, actually, maybe being closer to minimum effective dose might actually be smart. So let's put that in this box. There's another one I think is valuable as well, and I won't say names. Actually, I will say one name. But there are individuals, past and present, who tend to brand around low volume training. And I'll use Mike Menser as kind of the classic OG. But one of the misconceptions, and Menser fans are going to get mad about this one, but Mike didn't build his physique based on the training ideology that he professed. He built it on more of a classic, higher volume, classic bodybuilding era stuff. Also, Mike would have been a genetic freak. He would have had access to the latest drugs. So what I've seen is individuals who, and I'm not interested in demonizing people who are using drugs, but guess what? It is a piece of this puzzle, who built their muscle on traditional methodology with great genetics, with the drugs, and then turn around and purport that the evidence says lower volume training. So here's the thing that most people don't understand. It's a lot easier to maintain muscle mass with lower volume training once you've already built it, right? So that goes in, but I still think there's a very strong argument that a lot of people are probably overdoing it because you're training past a point that you can actually recover from.
Yeah. And can I highlight something there as well? Is that, you hit the nail on the head there in terms of like building the foundational part of your physique generally with higher volume. And you see it with most lifters. And I think there is still an absolute place for a higher volume approach when you start training, because let's be honest, higher volume can paper over a lot of cracks. And let's be real, when you start training, you are not going to be an efficient lifter. I look back at videos from when I'm very lucky. I started documenting my lifting journey on my phone, like back when I started lifting in a gym. And geez, a lot of the stuff that I was doing was atrocious. But the thing is, I was just doing so much stuff that there was enough good stuff in amongst all the not so good stuff that it helped me continue to make progress. And I think what people don't understand is, for me, I've run an experiment the last 12 months on myself whereby I basically looked at, okay, what's everybody talking about on social media at the moment? And let's apply it to myself. Let's see how it works, because I like to do that before I apply it to my clients. So the last 12 months, I've run a very low volume approach whereby I've basically done 2 sets to failure of basically any exercise that I put in my program, very much gone from 20 sets per workout down to sort of 10 sets per workout. And I've also been changing my nutrition, which we can talk about in a bit if you'd like. But essentially, I've run this experiment on myself and it's actually worked out really well. I'm probably the happiest with my physique I've ever been. But the caveat here is that I've now been lifting for 8 years. And I like to think that I lift pretty well. I'm a pretty good judge of what failure feels like and lifting to sort of that 0 to 2 RIR. I also like to think that the movements that I've done, because I've kept them consistently, I'm executing them very well. And I'm at this position now whereby I know I'm not going to build huge amounts of muscle year to year either. So everything I've done has helped me maximize this result, but from a very much more highly educated and much more better at applying a position than I would have been when I first started training. If I tried to do this when I first started training, I don't think I would get anywhere near the same amount of results. And I think that's something that people don't realize as well, is that this idea of quote unquote optimal training volumes and training rep ranges and movements and all that sort of stuff, it does change. It is a bit of a spectrum from beginner to advanced. And obviously we have these big rocks that need to stay. Like, you mentioned Romanian deadlifts before. Foundational posterior chain exercise. First day in the gym all the way through to 20 years in the gym, you should be doing Romanian deadlifts if you can. The other things around that, whereby, as you said, form can break down a little bit more. You can pull it back if you're a more advanced lifter. Lower volume, you can push harder if you're a more advanced lifter, all these sorts of things. So I think it's important as well to kind of dictate what it is you do with your exact approach based on where you are in your journey, simply by how well you can apply these concepts. And when you start anything, you're not going to be as good at applying any of these concepts. And that goes for everything in life.
So this can tie into, we've been talking about intensity, but let's go more specific. What does training to failure feel like? What should it feel like? Where are people missing getting into that? Because the research seems to point to probably within 0 to 5 reps of failure.
Yeah.
That's probably the explicit research. But most people are probably, especially because they're awful. Actually, I think for even experienced lifters are not great at knowing failure. So I tend to like, well, let's say within 0 to 2 reps of failure. So take it further.
Well, I think in terms of like what failure feels like, it's so hard to give a definition because it's going to change so much based on the exercise, right? So, if you're doing I love a pendulum squat, for example. I haven't been able to do it recently because of my knee, but, for the last year or so, it's been my main squat movement has been the Atlantis pendulum. Freaking love that thing. Hate it, but love it. Failure on that, to me, is literally seeing stars. Like, it's my least favorite feeling in the gym. Like, it is genuinely, I need 5 minutes between sets. I'm absolutely cooked. And if I hit absolute failure, it's this thing of, I've got this. Oh shit, I don't. It's coming right back down. I'm now sitting on my ass and I need to call out of the machine. That is what failure there feels like. Conversely, if we take the same muscle group and we go over to a leg extension and we perform this single joint exercise, failure here is probably more so going to feel like a really strong, hard burning sensation in my quads, because now the main difference we've got is, yes, one's a multi-joint, one's a single joint exercise, but also the pendulum trains the quads in a really deep stretch. So we're not necessarily going to feel the quads as much here, whereas the leg extension trains the quads more so in that, well, you can set it up for stretch, but if you just sit and rip, basically, you're going to train it more towards the top in that knee extended position. When the quads are shortened, we're now going to accumulate more what's called metabolites. So we're just going to get more lactic acid and blood into the muscle. So you're going to feel more sensation. So on that, failure is going to be this case of not necessarily being able to lock out the knee, but also being like, oh, wow, I can really feel that burns a lot but actual failure is going to be pushing through that burn for another couple of reps. So what I always used to do when I was face-to-face PTing more, because I'm mostly online now, is if a client wasn't the best at judging what failure actually feels like, I would put them on an exercise like a leg extension or a leg curl or even like a lateral raise or a bicep curl, just something where they're going to feel that movement pretty strongly, pretty strong sensation because they're generally squeezed based movements. And I would say, okay, go until it burns. Just with this weight, let's not count the reps. Let's go until it burns. Once it started burning, I'd be like, great, 4 more. And they would keep going and they would be like, oh, okay. And we get to this point where now it was burning and they couldn't complete reps anymore. And I was like, that is failure. And that's going to feel different depending on the exercise. I had a client recently. Sorry, you want to go?
Actually, I think there's one way to sort of like create a little bit more of a simple explanation between the disparity. Oftentimes with those things that are burning, usually it's kind of pushing through mentally. It's your mind is going to want to shut you down before your body gives out. Whereas if you're on big compound lift like the pendulum squat, chances are you'll actually physically not be able to move the weight as you experience failure. So you also have to know, all right, is it unsafe? Like a regular squat, certain other exercises, barbell bench press, no spotter. If you physically fail and can't do it, you're exposing yourself to some element of risk or putting yourself in a compromised position. So that's actually a skill you have to learn. Learning how to get near failure is a skill. That's why we're having this conversation. But for a lot of things like bicep curls, you like pause, breathe, whatever, you squeeze out another one. It's just physically unpleasant. It's also one of my arguments why if you can take sets of 20 to failure and it elicits a lot of muscle growth. Sometimes, let's say your joints are really pissed off at the lighter weight just feels better. Great. But you can't do all your training like this. It's physically super unpleasant. It creates terrifying amounts of fatigue, especially if you're doing compound exercise. Like a set of squats to 20 produces so much neurological fatigue. It's hard to recover from that kind of stimulus. Plus, it feels awful. It can make you physically ill. Okay. So I think it's also a good thing for people to experience on occasion. There's so many principles here. I'm kind of dancing around, but even just this fear of fatigue that some people in the industry have is like, listen, you need to learn to train hard. You need to learn to psychologically tolerate difficult training. You need to build the stamina to be able to do the kind of training to get the overall stimulus to grow. I believe that's really important. So this idea that people are afraid to actually push things to near failure is a little bit nuts, although I think you have to do it responsibly. So, but throw it back.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Like anything that you do fitness, like training is not meant to be comfortable. This is what people kind of miss. They think like, I see a lot of posts online, a lot of people talking in gyms about like, when do I enjoy? And I'm like, once you start to realize that the process is going to be fairly uncomfortable for the majority of it, like, let's be real. You go in and you do a hard session on the pendulum squat and the leg extension. I don't give a shit who you are. You are not going to enjoy that. Like, it is going to be one of the worst experiences of your week, but you're going to come back and do it again and do it again and do it again. And it's learning to enjoy the progressions that you get. It's learning to enjoy that process rather than enjoying the actual brutality of totaling yourself. But
listen, people pay to get tattoos. Like, I don't have any tattoos. A lot of my good friends love tattoos. They fucking love this shit. There are people that pay a lot of money for another individual to like whip them and beat them up and do all sorts of other like sadist type shit, masochistic type shit. Like, yeah, sure, if that's your jam, great, whatever. So like for me, I'll just side up to like have the unpleasantness and discomfort of the gym, and I'll keep coming back, like walk out of there going, yeah, that was fucking great. Let's do it again. Right. Like, I can't wait for the next time. And some people who don't understand us are like, you guys are crazy. It's like, yes, I think you actually have to be crazy to like do it at the level we do.
Little bit
also
unhinged.
Can't lose sight of this fact, because when we're trying to communicate to other people, it's like, oh no, this is the greatest thing in the world. It's like, well, actually, some of it's kind of unpleasant in the moment. You'll learn to love it. You have to trust us on that. And people are like, I don't know about that.
Well, that's the thing, man. And it's like, even today. So after this podcast, I'm going to go see my physio. I tore my meniscus a few months back, so I've been getting some treatment and stuff. And I've been loving dry needling lately. Now, look, I know the research on dry needling, a little bit murky and stuff. But, for me, even if it's a placebo, this thing makes me feel so good. It makes my hips feel looser. It makes my shoulders feel looser. In the moment, it is the most uncomfortable sensation ever. Like my physio always jokes with me. He loves it because he's like, he's like, you're getting used to it now, but I want to find the painful spots and stuff, like, because it's really painful. But I keep coming back. And the reason I keep coming back is because I know how good it makes me feel after the discomfort and like seeing the result of that treatment. And it's the same with training. I think, with the discomfort side of things, same thing with nutrition. When you're eating more food, putting on a little bit of body fat to build muscle, in a year's time, when you diet down a little bit and you suddenly see the change in body shape and you see that you've achieved this result where you're like, oh my God, I never thought that was possible. That's when you start to like quote unquote enjoy it, because you start to reap the rewards and you start to see the progress. And I think the problem for a lot of people with the discomfort side is they do it once and they go, this was horrible, I don't ever want to do this again, but I still want to get the results. And it's like it doesn't work like that, I'm afraid. You have to push through. But yeah, the dry needling pain.
Okay, machines versus free weights. Research saying now, does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, TLDR version, no, at the end of the day. But I mean, well, this is where if we give it a bit more context, like it can matter, but realistically, as an umbrella field, again, same thing as you said with the rep ranges. If you can take it within 5 reps shy of failure safely with good technique, push yourself hard, it's not going to matter. Some people will find a machine squat far more comfortable, far more stable, far easier to take into that range than a barbell squat. Even seasoned barbell squatters, my videographer Musti, like he's been working with Sebastian Oreb a lot lately, the Australian strength coach, one of the strongest coaches on the planet, coached one of the strongest athletes ever. And, he always says, he's like, yeah, in our training, the whole point is to get as strong as possible, but squats, deadlifts, all that sort of stuff to manage fatigue and everything, you actually don't go all the way to failure. You keep a couple of reps in reserve, and that's.
There's something as well about squatting and these technical lifts. They're skill-based lifts, and a lot of people forget this stuff. I think they're amazing. I've done them for years. I think they're amazing stimulus for strength and growth. But once you get mature to a certain point where you're training, especially if the barbell stuff, it can feel great. It can be good, but sometimes, you do this long enough, you can feel beaten up by these things. The barbell lifts beat me up now, especially squatting and benching, shoulder and a knee issue. But I think if you look at, especially for the competitive side, as developing and maintaining the skill work, especially once you have it, you actually have to spend less time on it. And it can be more fatigue efficient to use accessory lifts or even machine lifts. And I've noticed, I remember when I was an earlier trainer in my career, I would look at the older guys who would like be on the machines mostly. And I'm just like, what are those guys doing? And now I'm that older guy who's using a lot more machines. I'm like, I get it. Because number one, you can produce a ton of mechanical tension machines. That's why I like the pendulum squat. It's why I like chest and shoulder pressing machines. They often feel better on joints. It's just a thing. With my knee, so I have a recovering grade 1 ACL sprain that happened in April. As I'm getting older, I always go up and down stairs fast. Okay. And if you're wearing socks on carpet stairs, it's dangerous shit. From what I understand, anecdotally, people are found dead at the bottom of stairs wearing socks. Okay.
Jeez.
And so one of my feet out from under me, and I'm 250 pounds. I'm a big dude. And my leg went under my body and I fell on it on stairs. So I felt something that wasn't good. And so I was limping around for a while afterwards. And so, I've had people look at it, but my friend, Dr. Sam Spinelli, was in town doing a seminar. So he poked around it and he's like, yeah, I think you have a quarter post injury and a grade 1 ACL sprain. And I'll take Sam's word for it. And I had something previous, and I think I had a meniscus injury leading up to it. So I think that knee is probably a little bit goofy. It doesn't love the feeling. I have a lot of like tension sensation, almost like fear of like a body weight squat deeper. And I've always had deep squat. But if I put on knee sleeves and I sit in a pendulum, I'm fine. There's no pain afterwards. I feel really good. I can load the thing and I can produce a lot of tension on it. Deficit reverse lunges feel really good. Split squats feel really good. Leg extension feels really good. It's game on, right? And all the hip dominant stuff's great. So I've been biasing more towards the pendulum squat to the point where I'm literally buying one from my basement gym because I've got that big deck out, but I'm like, no, I need this thing now, right? Because I was waiting half an hour. I did a post about it today. I was waiting half an hour for a pendulum squat at the gym. I went and did some other shit. I was fine. Finally got around to it. I was like, fuck this. I'm driving like 20, 25 minutes to get to this one gym with a pendulum squat and I'm waiting for it. No, I'm getting my own. So the thing I really like now is, and I've been on this for a while, I do this with clients a lot, is adding support and stability to exercise. And it doesn't mean that everything can't be a free weight exercise, but if the constraint, you got to look at constraints. So what is your constraint to taking this to near failure and putting a lot of tension on something? If it's the skill about, so let's say like a single leg RDL, I think as an athletic skill, great stuff, but you're not going to load a single leg RDL to near failure for your glutes and your hamstrings. You're simply not going to fucking do it. So what do I like doing? Weight in one hand, hold a bench in the other, and do them supported. Stability is great. I like supported Bulgarian squats, especially with a safety bar. You can load the shit out of those. I
Yeah, big fan of
love
B stance stuff as well. Like if you're doing a single
brilliant.
leg hip thrust is impossible to load up, but a B stance hip thrust, so much easier to do. Same thing with RDL. If you can't do the single leg RDL, even with a bench, if you're training at home, B stance. Find your RDL stance, move one toe back so it's in line with the other heel. There we go, B stance. Now go.
Beautiful. One of my favorite things. So for all the shit I make fun of, like single arm cable stuff, I
Mm,
love propping up a bench to like almost 90 degrees,
mm,
facing backwards into it at a cable and just doing a high row single arm. And
mm.
you get so much great tension. You can really control the upward rotation of your shoulder. I feel it's really good for shoulder health. You really feel your lats. I am a huge fan of this exercise. It's a staple for me now. I like machine-based rows. I love single arm preacher curl where I turn slightly sideways and really wedge my, I always
Hmm.
laugh when people don't do this, wedge your armpit right into the top of the
Yep.
pad and just using weight you can control, right? And I love this style of training. And, depending on the kind of client, I bring a little bit more stability into what they're doing. And I think it's a really good way to manage fatigue and get a little bit more of that mechanical tension and to near failure out of your training. And we do know through research, and these are probably the key mechanisms behind it, they're really good for producing, strength and mechanical tension and muscle growth. Now, going back to the skill development, for maximal performance, which is going to be strength in strength sports, Olympic lifts, power lifts, or whatever, a big component is the neurological skill of
Hmm.
it's the motor pattern, right? So you have to be very skilled at the motor pattern in order to express maximal strength. So you cannot just do a pendulum squat all day and then step into a meet and go, okay, cool, now I'm going to barbell squat. If the skill isn't there, your output is not going to peak.
100%. And I think it's easier to come to terms with this if you're somebody who's played a sport before or you've played an instrument or anything like that, whereby you've had to put hours in to improve that specific skill. So for me, I played a lot of soccer when I was younger. I played a lot of cricket, which you guys over that side of the world have no idea what that is, but it's
It's
basically
like
baseball, but
weird,
slower.
weird
Um,
baseball, but they just run back
yeah,
and forth instead of four bases as these two. And the
honestly,
bat is flat. It looks like a beaver's
yeah,
tail.
flat batted slow baseball is how I would describe it. Baseball for posh English twats, basically. But so I played both of those sports when I was younger. I've played guitar since I was 11 years old. All of these things are things that took me a long time to get even semi good at, essentially. And the more hours you put in, the more practice you do, the better you get. It's like you see people look at the best athletes in the world. Cristiano Ronaldo has probably kicked a ball more times than I've woken up in the morning at this point. And that is why he is so good at football. And it's the same when it comes to any of these lifts. And so, if you've got a big movement like a squat, if I think back to the first time I ever barbell squatted, God, I dread to think what that would have looked like. Even now, I haven't barbell squatted in over a year. I hit 180 kilograms, so about a 400-pound squat last year. I was like, cool, done, happy days. That's all I ever wanted to do with my squat. I hit my three plate bench as well that week. I was like, done, happy days. Ever since, chest press machines, pendulum squats, still do heavy dips, love heavy dips. But all of these things take a little bit less skill for me to be good at. And what this then also does is if we bring it back to session length and things like that, there's less amount of time for me to have to warm into those exercises as well. I get a lot more bang for buck out of them. My progressions are more consistent as well. What I think a lot of people don't realize too is that the mental component of doing heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, heavy bench presses, all this sort of stuff, if you've had a shit week, if you've slept really poorly, you come into the gym, chances are you're probably not going to take a progression on your squat from what you were doing last week, especially if you're pushing yourself hard. Whereas with a pendulum squat, if you can just find that little bit of inner darkness for 5 minutes for the pendulum squat to just get in the machine, find your position, and just push a little bit harder, you might add 5 pounds, even though you slept pretty poorly, because all the other things are taken care of for you. All you have to do is unrack, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up. And I love what you highlighted there with the anchoring and all that sort of stuff as well, is that, so many people just suck at moving through space at the end of the day. So if you can make it easier for someone to do that by anchoring joints and preventing compensations, like preacher curls, for example, they get such a bad rap for bicep tears and all this sort of stuff. But if you watch the majority of these videos on Instagram where people's biceps are popping out left, right, and center doing a preacher curl, it's because none of their upper arm is in contact with the bench. They're yanking it, they're pulling their armpits up, they're compensating from the shoulder. And it's like, no wonder you're getting injured doing that because it's a shit show of a lift. Whereas that variation that you mentioned, slightly on the side, really anchoring that upper arm and that armpit so you can't move anywhere other than at the elbow joint so the bicep can produce max force, absolute game changer.
Load management. I
Yeah.
mean, this is one of the big things. I've got a presentation on this stuff. The research is really cool. Is a lot of the stuff that form gets blamed for is really a load management problem. So let's talk
Hmm.
pre-stroke specifically. If someone has not put themselves in that position and exposed the tissue of your bicep tendon, your bicep to that loaded position, and you use too much load, is that a form issue? No, it's a load management issue. The
Hmm.
tissue's not used to it. It's like going in and having not deadlifted in a very long time and all of a sudden just going and working up to very, very heavy loads very quickly because you used to be able to do it 10 years ago. Well, guess what?
Yes.
Your spinal tissue's not used to that progression, and therefore load management's really poor. You made a very large jump in volume and intensity and load, and that is a risk factor for injury. So that's how injuries occur. So, and if you're not, I think form is a really good way of standardizing something that keeps your load management in check. Because a
Yeah.
lot of the time where load starts to go to shit visibly is because form is going to shit visually. Someone is using too much load. And the only
Yes.
way that they can load that way is for the form to get bastardized. So is it a
Yeah.
form issue or is it a load issue? And it's probably a load progression issue.
And this is the thing people don't realize as well is that you have, when it comes to range of motion, you have passive range of motion and you have active range of motion. And so just because you can bend over and touch your toes
Mm.
without anything happening, with no weight, somebody says to you, can you tie your shoelaces without bending down? Great, awesome, you can do that. Put 50 kilograms in each hand and try and do that. You will not be able to get down to your toes and stand back up with your glutes and hamstrings doing their job necessarily unless you've ever loaded that position before. And this is where sorry to go on a tangent, but some of the stretch stuff for me gets a little bit murky because you look at this idea of putting a muscle under as much stretch as possible and having this passive tension and everything. And it's like, well, if you're not used to that position and all of a sudden you're now being asked to load that really heavy and you're being asked to go to failure and all that sort of stuff in these positions, that's how you get injured. That's how I injured my meniscus. I was on the pendulum squat. I loaded up. I probably made too much of a load jump to what I'd been making the previous weeks. I was really hyped up. I was like, I just hit a PB, going to do another set. And I bumped the weight up even further. On my second rep, because the weight was heavier than what I was used to, I actually went lower than I normally do.
Mm.
Normally, I will sit kind of just hamstrings on calves, but I bottomed the fuck out of this machine. And as I pushed back up, there was a noise. And
Mm.
straight away, I was like, nah, you done messed up, Aaron. So racked it back in, got off, got my scan, and straight away they were like, yeah, lateral meniscus tear, gone. And I was like, oh, you can do that on a squat? And he's like, yeah, you've got to a range where you're not used to, your tibial rotation isn't good enough to kind of cope with that. So something's compensated and there goes the meniscus. So, again, as you said, it was all a load management issue, pushed into a range I wasn't used to and at too heavy of a weight and yeah, paid the price.
Yeah, control through in range of motion. Absolutely, the
Yep.
whole passive versus active thing is really super important. So I love that stuff. Um, yeah, I honestly have been planning a post. I haven't gotten it the right words yet, but people have a lot of goofy ideas about stretching, and I kind of was always in the anti-stretching camp. But I've come back a little bit because number one, research on like if you hold positions for really long, like 30-minute plus periods of time, which of course is not practical and is horribly unpleasant. So I
Yeah.
don't recommend it. And that can create like length and muscle, sure. But if you want additional mobility, because usually what people are chasing if they're stretching is they're chasing additional mobility, you need to do two things. You do need to load. And I mean, that's resistance training. Resistance training is loading under stress,
Yes.
right? But you
Yes.
also have to be able to control through end ranges of motion. And if you do that, you get stronger, better motor control. Motor control is a big one. Into those end ranges, you will have greater access to those ranges of motion.
Mm.
There's another dimension too, and you mention it with the acupuncture or the dry needling. As much as these passive kind of physio modalities don't create enduring changes, they temporarily, I mean, the immediate effect is they relax the neural tension of tight muscles. Okay. And sometimes
Yes.
if there's an injured site, there's guarding around it. And if it's painful and you can't enter that range of motion, it's hard to strengthen it with control to rehabilitate it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
good physical therapy. And again, I'm not a physical therapist, but go follow like someone like an Adam Meekins or Sam Spinelli. They're brilliant at this stuff. And the ones who value strength training, they'll understand use the passive modality to alleviate pain, and that allows someone to use appropriate load management for the injured tissue, which is probably going to be regressed over what you might normally do, and you control into the end range that you now have access to because the pain is no longer as much of an issue, and you can strengthen it that way. And that is the best way to rehabilitate stuff. So have a really good professional in your corner is going to help.
Yeah, 100%. And also even just little things like, so for me, for example, my dorsiflexion in my right ankle is awful, absolutely awful. Has been ever since I was in my early teens. I ruptured my Achilles when I was younger, being 13, 14 when I did it. Of course, I didn't rehab it. Like, you want me to do calf raises on the stairs 3 times a week? 14 years old, mate. I'll just run it off. But it's stayed with me the entire time. But a lot of this tightness is, as you mentioned before, a neurological barrier. So it's your brain kind of going, no, we can't go there because we've been there before and we get injured or we get hurt or we don't like going there for whatever reason. But for me, all it takes for me to get into a better position with my dorsiflexion and improve my foot positioning and my foot pressure, especially as I train, is before I train, just doing a couple of holds in a calf raised position at the bottom in that lengthened position, just basically PNF stretching myself, deep breath in, deep breath out, and push slowly, because as you breathe out, guys, you relax so you can push further into different ranges. I do this passively, and then I do it with some light weight on a standing calf raised machine, and that's enough for me to be able to start pushing into better ranges of dorsiflexion when I perform my squats or my split squats. But again, I can see sort of point, I think you're going to highlight the foot pressure as well, possibly.
No, not at all. I mean,
no, okay.
no, I agree.
That's another one, guys. If you're, for example, you mentioned an RDL a little bit back in this podcast, if you're finding that you struggle to move through your hips and move through your knees, assess your foot pressure as well. This is something that other people don't think about. I just kind of wanted to highlight this because it's something I learned off Prescript at the start of the year, and it like blew my mind a little bit there, of kind of, if you're doing an RDL and you get that cue of sit back into your heels, no wonder your RDL shit, because if you're sitting back so far into your heels that your toes are starting to lift off the floor, you are losing the ability to keep even foot pressure. So push those big toes down, keep your heels flat on the floor, and then push your hips back, and you'll see a remarkable difference. And it's the same for any of these kind of lower body mobility issues. Start getting better at the specific foot pressures. And you can see some of my content for this, or just go follow the guys at Prescript because they're fucking great for that sort of stuff.
Can't recommend them enough. I mean, if you're going to go to, get off the TikTok biomechanics and actually get into training anatomy and biomechanics, Jordan Shallow, his team, Jordan Junta, Killian, and Prescript. I've done the course level 1. I love it. Yeah. And what you just described there is Jordan may be the best person at communicating and understanding center of mass and your center of mass as it changes as your body moves through space. So that's a little bit more technical than what we have time for here. I can't promise it, but I'll do my best to get Jordan Shallow back on the podcast. I actually had him on quite a while ago. If you guys are interested in digging into that, I can't remember what episode number it is, but if you scroll, you'll find Shallow. Shallow's brilliant. Jack, you have been sensational. This is good. Where can people find you on your media?
Just Jack Hallows Fitness on Instagram. I'm sure it'll probably be linked down below, but that's just everything through there, guys. One-to-one coaching is pretty much the only thing that I have to offer at the moment that you can pay me for. Depending on how the economy goes, OnlyFans may be coming soon. No, I'm kidding. But Andrew, man, I appreciate you having me on, dude. I really, really enjoyed this. It's really nice to get to chat again. It's been a while. Been a while since face-to-face.
This was fun. So obviously, I'm not sure what order I'll air these episodes in, but everybody listening, for the longstanding coaches, I honestly believe these conversations are going to be just as valuable for you guys, because these are going to be concepts that we're talking about to our clients all the time. And I'm hoping there are new audience members, people who found you through me, or people who are part of my media who are exploring the podcast for the first time because of the pivot to more of a general thing. It's not always about career success for trainers. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. I would love to have your feedback. So I would say post this, tag me on your Instagram stories. Okay? If you have a private account, just send me a message. Let me know, because I won't see the tags if it's private. But I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear what your feedback says. And if you are someone who is interested in the career side of stuff, go back in time. I think it's 319 episodes under the old track. It's all, it's the same name. There's an old name for the first 150 with my old co-host, Dean Guido, who's great. And you'll get an absolute mountain of great stuff when it comes to career development. So there's a whole gold mine there. But I hope everybody enjoyed this. Stay tuned. I definitely want to get this in the hands of more people. So anything you can do to help me with that mission is great. Go follow Jack, please. I actually was on your podcast. I don't know if you're going to reboot and do more episodes of yours, So if they want to dig
Yeah.
in,
Well, spoiler alert, I do have something in the works with that. But yeah, I've been terrible with the podcast this year, but hopefully, fingers crossed, 2025, it's coming back. It's coming back in a slightly different format, but it's coming back.
and I needed a little bit of a hiatus. And I'll say it again. Sorry, guys, I need to do this, but I was working on the behind the scenes to make sure that I could do this in a way that I was re-energized, excited. I could bring great guests on who would be valuable to the listener. And at the end of the day, there are so many ways that we can spend our time consuming media, and there's so much more than ever out there that it is tricky to grow in the podcast space. So I want this to be absolute dynamite. I've got a lot of great guests lined up. I have a big list of people, a lot are booked. So hopefully you're enjoying the initial splash. So go check out Jack and tune in for the next one. Thank you.